Hello, everyone. Welcome to a brand new episode of the Digital Adoption Show. And we've been hosting a lot of top minds from L&D, HR, tech, and whatnot in this future of work and technology focused podcast. And I'm your host, Gopal Suresh, Global Head of Growth and Field Marketing at Whatfix. And today I have yet another guest with a lot of insights into the most buzzword ultimately, which is their AI, right? So we're going to talk about the future of learning tech stack with the rise of AI. I have Ashwin Mehta alongside with me. And Ashwin, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
So we got some fantastic questions lined up for you. We'll also be tackling that burning question in everyone's mind. Is the rise in AI a threat to your job? Right. I want to keep that ominous tone towards it, but let's say stick around till the end of the podcast. Right. Ashwin, to start with, let me briefly intro you, and I would love to actually hear more from you as well about your journey. So Dr. Ashwin Mehta, right? He's an AI strategist, thought leader, and management consultant, and a learning technology leader. He has been working for about 14 years at senior levels across transport, consulting, medical, and pharmaceutical sectors. And he holds an MBA and a PhD in learning technology adoption. And his experience includes data science, machine learning, and artificial intelligence. Right? Ashwin has led AI teams and learning teams and is also the founder of Methodology, right? Am I pronouncing that right? Methodology? Right. And that's his consulting practice, specializing in AI, innovation, and advanced technology in learning. Right. So, Ashwin, welcome again to the show. Couldn't be more excited for this conversation. What did I miss in the intro?
So you didn't let anything in the intro, but in terms of the story and how I got here, it's important to note that I started the L&D journey looking at workforce resilience. So I was looking at how frontline operations in medical research in sub-Saharan Africa could be made more resilient by having the right people with the right skills at the right time to enable research programs. And that's an important thread for the rest of what we're going to discuss, because effectively we in L&D are trying to enable companies to have the right resources available to enable competitive advantage in the marketplace. So it's important that we never lose that thread. But otherwise, the intro was amazing. Thank you for that.
Awesome. Awesome. And I've been seeing you a lot on LinkedIn. I think ever since we connected, I see that you're in plenty of sessions, podcast, webinars, and whatnot. And if you're watching this video, amazing guitars on your background, that's a constant too, right? So I see that you do a lot of jamming. Is that right? So is that how you manage your time?
That's how I manage my creative output. So it's important not only to work, but also to have something that allows you to chill out and flex your brain.
So that takes out the stress, and that's also a passion. So do you create music? What's music for you?
I think we all like to think we create music, right? But music is the signal that you separate from the noise. So we all make noise on a day-to-day basis, and some of that noise, as you can tell right now, is communication. So we have language, and in that language we convey meaning. And hopefully we do the same, whether it's our voice that we're using or whether it's some other kind of instrument. The intent is to convey some kind of meaning, something that means something to me, and hopefully you hear it and it means something to you as well. So for me, that's music. It doesn't really matter what it is.
Awesome. So I have a few more questions there to start with, to break the ice and to keep everything fun, right? So I have a quick rapid fire segment. We call it triple strike. All good, Ashwin? I have a few questions. I'll throw it to triple strike you pretty much. I'll start with the music piece itself. So if you could jam with any musician, living or dead, right, who would that be? And what's the song that you would play?
So I'm going to go with Freddie Mercury, who was the lead singer of the band Queen. And
Right.
I wouldn't go with a song, because if we're jamming, we want it to be improv. We want it to be free flowing. But I think he would be an absolutely great person to jam with.
Yeah, absolutely. I keep seeing the concerts even now, the ones which was recorded back there, and the way he grabs the crowd, it's just truly amazing. And you said you don't want to focus on any song, really? Nothing?
Yeah. So the thing is, when you play with a band, and if you watch any band, they're behind the scenes kind of footage, and it's also through the teamwork, that every member of the band bounces off each other, and you do something that you couldn't do by yourself, right? It's through an education, it's zone of proximal development, the more knowledgeable other, the Vygotskian paradigm of education. But when you do this in a band situation, you want somebody who's going to push you to do something that you wouldn't have done otherwise. And that's why I say no particular song, because you don't know where it goes.
Right. You need to feel it and just go for it, right?
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right. So on the second one, so Ashwin, if you could eat one food for the rest of your life, what would that be?
I would probably go mutton curry and latte pasta. If it
Interesting.
was an ingredient, one
Mhm.
ingredient, I would probably go eggs because they're so versatile.
Yeah, yeah. You can do so many things with it. So why the mutton curry? I mean, is that like to the roots, or is that something that you make really amazing, or how is that?
So it's something when I was growing up, my father used to make this regularly, and my mother would make the pasta. So it's something that I remember my parents doing from a very young age. They would be in the kitchen, cleaning and cutting and then cooking mutton, and it has such a rich flavor. Getting all of that masala in there, so rich and spicy. And then,
Hmm.
of course, buttery breads to go with it is always amazing
Why do you get the feeling that you want to make it today?
because you just reminded me that I want.
Awesome. Right. So the third question, again, it's about a lot in the conversation that will come across AI, right? So if you could automate one part of your life, whether it's doing laundry or finding the perfect guitar solo or getting everything in learning technology sorted, what would you have it handle? What would you have your AI handle, and why?
So I saw this thing on Instagram a while ago. It was maybe 2, 3 weeks ago, and somebody had posted a picture that said, I wanted AI to do my laundry and my dishes so I could focus on creative writing and poetry and things like this, the human expression. And we've ended up in a slightly different scenario. I still don't have an automation service for doing my dishes or doing my laundry, but somehow we have AI tools that can write poetry and make paintings for us. I think I would want, as you've said, I would want it to take care of all the housework that I don't want to, the dishes, the laundry, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I wouldn't say we're too far off from that. Elon Musk did launch the humanoid robots recently, right? And he's expecting it to do a lot of these things.
I mean, it does require robotics as part of it rather than simply just AI. But yeah, I mean, maybe it'll come soon. Who knows?
Yeah. Awesome. Awesome. All right. So that's triple strike. And now I'll move on to the real questions. So to start off with, let's set some context for the audience, right? So Ashwin, if you could help me with your journey, I mean, across in learning technology, in AI, there's so many things that I mentioned in the intro as well, which you kindly said was succinct, right? So if you could actually help me understand, how did it all start, and what's your journey been? Audience loves hearing these stories firsthand, and a lot of inspiring anecdotes over there as well, right?
Yeah, so my career journey started in chemistry, actually. So I was doing chemistry. I did a degree master's of chemistry in Liverpool, and I was working in a small company, and we were doing some pharmaceutical research, which was some of that was catalysis, some of it was organic chemistry, but basically we were in the lab and we were doing things. And over time, I became less interested in that, more interested in kind of the business processes around running labs and running organizations. And I moved from there into a variety of different things. First of all, I went into consulting and I was doing chemical consulting. Then I moved to another organization and I was looking at safety in labs. I was looking at business continuity. I was looking at operational resilience more broadly. And that took me to this concept of workforce resilience. So I was in the Gambia in West Africa, and I was looking at something, I think it's flood defenses I was looking at for a field station that was on the banks of a river. And while we were there, I was looking at all of the different things that might affect the operations. Effectively, you need freezers, you need labs, you need equipment, you need consumables, you need participants, and you need a workforce. And the workforce was coming from the local communities, and they were well-connected, enthusiastic, hardworking people. And they would be recruited into the organization, and then they would sit in a classroom for 16 weeks, understanding what it was that they needed to do. And they would be taught by some trainers, and there were various problems with that because this organization had trained 15 trainers, but only 3 remained because they've moved on in their career, they've done other things. So now you have 3 trainers, and the entire organization depends on this workforce recruiting participants for research and promoting health and hygiene and doing all of the other things field workers do. And my initial thought was, can we do some of this digitally, and can we alleviate the burden of relying only on these 3 people to train the entire workforce? And that there were lots of barriers there. So barriers are, well, power, electricity, and broadband, and all of these things are unstable and unreliable. So we need to do something to address that. We don't have computer labs, so we need to do something to address that. We don't have IT skills because mostly these are workers that are out in the field, and we haven't, to this date, we have not installed any computers. Fine, let's do that. And then there were all of these things that needed to be effectively the facilitating conditions with digital learning. And then we needed to have some digital learning. We need to have the platforms to make it accessible. So all of these, this became a really holistic project end to end. And that was really interesting for me. But that led me then down the journey of looking at, if I'm doing this in different countries, how do people with different countries, different infrastructure, different social infrastructure, culture, all of these things, how do they interact with technology when they actually have the chance to do so? So that led me down the path of, well, can we statistically model what that looks like? And I ran a study across multiple countries, including the UK and West Africa and East Africa, and looking at basically what are the common factors and what are the things that are unique to each context. And when you develop a statistical model, you have lots of data. So I was doing statistical modeling. But then after that, I became interested in, can we predict the same thing using machine learning? Can we detect the patterns? Can we then build some kind of prediction or predictive analytics around this thing? So that was my journey into L&D. And I was in consulting for a few years. And then I was leading innovation in a global corporate for a couple of years. And I decided I'm going to go on my own. Now, this is exactly where we are. This is me doing my thing on my own.
Amazing. And assuming throughout your journey, there have been so many obsessions that you wanted to actually, okay, I need to figure this out. I need to do this. And you have come to a point where you're consulting now. So what are you currently obsessed about?
So obsessed is probably a strong term because I do get really into a lot of things that I'm doing. One of the things that I find really interesting about the AI revolution is just how adoption speed and convergence and divergence in the market are happening. So if we take, so you have the idea of a foundational model, and ChatGPT came out in November 22, I think it was, around that time. And we had this explosion in the market. There were so many tools. Everybody's effectively reskinning chat and using it for something. And then the next release, OpenAI came out with another release, and probably, I'm just going to make up a figure now, I haven't validated this at all, but 80-90% of the market effectively became useless overnight because their functionality was taken up in whatever the new release was. So we have this cycle of expansion and contraction, which I think is really interesting. But that leads us to the idea that it starts to become confusing for people who aren't in the field to keep up with everything that's happening, because every day there's a new tool. And most of the conversations that are happening are, well, what's the tool for this? What kinds of technologies are we seeing in the market? What should I be using? What shouldn't I be using? So this area of effectively tool and market landscaping becomes quite interesting. I wouldn't say I'm necessarily upset with that, but it's one of the many things about this field that I find to be quite interesting to look at.
And that makes me think of, let's say, our audience uses a wide variety of tools, right? LMSs, learning experience tools, reporting tools, create tools, right? Even our tool, Whatfix, which is a digital adoption platform. All of this actually accentuates learning and development particularly. And AI is a brand new layer which is built on top of it, right? So how does that typical learning technology stack look like in today's business environment?
Yeah, so I'll talk about the stack in a second, but it's also important to just position all of this in learning versus learning and development. So learning as a human imperative. So every person, every child that sees fire for the first time somehow learns. It's a natural part of the human condition. We learn from our environment, we learn from each other. That's separate to the concept of enterprise learning and development. So enterprise learning and development tends to be, how do organizations manage either skills or knowledge throughout the entirety of their workforce? How do they then report on those things? And how do they try to make slightly different strategies for competitive advantage? That's a very different thing from human learning. So let's establish that at the outset. Now, the stack, the concept of a stack is talking about technology architecture that helps an enterprise do the second thing that I said, to manage the skills and knowledge and information across their human capital, across their workforce. And that architecture tends to be slightly different depending on the size of the organization. But typically we're looking at some kind of skills that might come from an HR system. So, for example, Oracle, SAP, Workday, these kinds of tools. Or it might come from something a little bit more specialist, talent marketplace kind of technology. So, Eightfold, Glows, Fuel 30, all of these kinds of companies. But in that
Mm-hmm.
space, you have, can we measure effectively the talent marketplace, the skills marketplace? So supply and demand. What do we want? How do we get it from our workforce? And usually, if we can't get it, we turn to learning. So we say we want to develop skills in our internal workforce, or we turn to recruitment, regardless of bringing these skills in from externally. We could also turn to procurement strategy. So we're going to use a particular vendor or particular supplier that has these skills that we don't have. So you've got your skills architecture there. Typically, then your learning stack tends to be an experience layer, learning experience layer, a learning management system, and some kind of database, some kind of data repository. The market in this space, in the learning experience and the learning management system area, management is effectively push, experience is effectively pull. So we need our workforce to do certain things. We call that training. This is mandatory. It's a risk mitigation measure for business. Let's not pretend that it's learning. Most people don't learn anything from that. But the organization says we have a tick box and we have satisfied some kind of requirement that we needed to fulfill. And so that's your management system. And you can push things to different people, different roles, and then you can validate the data effectively, click the button. The experience layer is slightly different. So that's people pulling from content repositories, content libraries. You might get LinkedIn Learning, Go One, these style of content libraries, which link into platforms like Degree, Edcast, Learning Pool, these kinds of things. And you get this ability to effectively the Netflix model. So this is where people who watch this content also watch this other content based on your prior history. Maybe you're interested in X, Y, and sometimes you get some skill architecture in there. But the Netflix problem also persists, which is you spend more time looking for things than you do watching things. So you get those couple of angles where your typical stack tends to be some kind of content library, some kind of experience layer that allows you to access content libraries, and some kind of push mechanism, things like training. All of that needs to be underpinned by data. So we talk about a typical L&D paradigm is learners access content on an infrastructure and that produces data. The interaction itself produces data. So you need some database structure to capture that content. I've just mentioned content. So you need usually some kind of technology to build digital learning content, whatever that looks like. You have the articulator solution that's kind of captivates it as well, where you can build SCORM packages and you can put those onto your push system and then make people do that. That's basically your typical stack. Now, in a large enterprise, depending on what large means, you usually have the productivity system. So Microsoft systems, for example, Teams and Office and all of these things as well. So we shouldn't ignore those because they're also a vital part of learning in the flow of work. So learning in the flow of work means I'm using Office systems and somehow there should be some learning right there, some kind of information, something that I can do. And this is where potentially AI tools or potentially digital adoption tools come in really handy because it's closer to the flow of work than I'm trying to learn something. So I'm going to go to a completely different platform with a completely different URL and potentially a different password. And I'm going to try and find some kind of content I can leverage in the thing that I'm doing over here on this screen. So as close as we can be to learning in the flow of work is ideal. And of course, the question arises then if enterprises are putting in all of this architecture and I want to learn how to, what's the formula for something in Excel? Probably I'm going to go to YouTube. Am I really going to go to this shiny, expensive architecture that my company has put in? So there's a point about value in there somewhere. Try and implement something that has value. And a lot of companies I see have sprawling technology landscapes. So I've got 25 LMSs and I've got 65 different content libraries, for all of which have got something ever so slightly different. And I've purchased Coursera and I've purchased this other thing, and all of these companies are examples, of course. But typically it's complex the bigger the business gets. But at its core, it's usually some kind of push, some kind of pull, and let's not forget some kind of share, so some kind of social learning, chat functionality, Slack, Teams. You can do these forums and some of the LSPs as well. When you have a complex system, of course, you need to think about APIs. So how does data flow through all of the systems? And we also have now the scary word of AI applications. So AI applications, some of these systems, of course, have AI functionality in them. So matching algorithms and skills or experience platforms. You might have AI assistants. You might have AI generated content. So all of these things are being woven into the fabric of a typical stack. But you also have standalone applications as well. These are the Synthesia, Colossian, Owl one for avatars. You have the Midjourney, DALL-E of this world of image generation. They have all the stable diffusion and all of these things for creating a few other things, runway, etc., etc. So all of these kind of content tools, they stand aside from the typical stack, but the outputs would need to go into the typical stack if they're going to be measured in some way as well.
Yeah, definitely. That was very well put. And in fact, it made me think a lot of different aspects as well. Think about the entire landscape that you just mentioned. You've created such a complex and, let's say, sophisticated landscape for learning that there's possibilities of anything and everything. And out there, the consumers are expected to figure out what actually works for them. And there's possibilities. There's so many things that they could actually go into. And now comes AI, which actually makes them much more simpler, where the goal over there is, despite having so many things in the landscape, we ultimately want a co-pilot where we just type in, okay, how do I do this? And it gives me, fetches the answer and shows me there. So we made it so sophisticated and complex to ultimately come to a problem statement that we need to simplify it. So that's how that entire AI system or the requirement or need for AI is also coming in. I want to go deep dive into the basics of it. So let's say, I'll put it in a 3-part question, right? So how do you think this AI fits into the L&D as of now? There's so many possibilities there, which we would also want to apply. So how does it fit into AI? That's first steps. And now you're saying that it's generally a layer on top. There's so many agents, there's so many co-pilots, right? So many from different aspects which can actually solve and make your life easier. Like you mentioned, for image processing, for content creation, all of those aspects come in. So how can an L&D professional really apply it? It's about identifying what works and how do I apply and apply it in a daily work life. So that's the major aspect to it. How does it fit into the L&D right now? And how can professionals use it on a daily basis for making life better?
I guess we need to clarify what is an L&D profession, right? An L&D professional will be using things for effectively what is it in their sphere of influence, whatever they can influence themselves. And at every level, you've probably got designers and developers who are L&D professionals, right? You have managers who manage teams of these people who are incentivized to producing output that is probably batch output or some kind of asset workflow. So I produced 100 e-learning courses, now I'm going to produce 1,000, and everybody's going to praise me and everybody gets a bonus, etc. But then you have maybe strategists and people who want to cause some kind of transformation, thinking about better cognitive, behavioral, motivational outcomes for a business. And maybe you have senior leaders who are looking at, we want our L&D functions to be equipping our workforce to increase revenue or things that matter for the business. So you've got all of these different levels to consider when we ask the question, how should people be using AI? So it becomes quite a complex answer. But fairly simply, the way I think about it is you have L&D. The traditional paradigm of L&D that I've described is you make some content or you buy some content, you put it on an architecture, and then you make that accessible to the work. In an ideal state, you measure efficacy, but sometimes you just fingers crossed and let's hope that everybody uses the thing that we just purchased. In that paradigm, where you have e-learning developers, e-learning designers, people who buy content, people who implement architectures, LMS managers, and all of these kinds of things, your baseline of using AI is going to be the tool that I already have available to me. Most of those are now integrating functionality, effectively a quality of life improvement. So it makes it easier to get from A to B, or my workflow is somehow streamlined, or I can eliminate parts of my workflow at whatever the cost is. So being familiar with the tool set that you are currently using and making sure that you understand all the AI functionality that's there and you're using it as well. So I've come across many colleagues and clients in the past who we have implemented an RXP. It has a recommender functionality, but we don't use it because reasons, there are always reasons, right? So if there is functionality there, you have to make a deliberate choice. Do I need to use this? Is it serving a purpose? Is it enhancing the experience of my workforce? Is it enhancing the skill set that I have available to me to make the business work? So these kinds of things are really step one. What do I already have that has incoming AI functionality? Can I use it? Then look to the rest of the world and figure out, is there anything that I'm missing? If I was to spend, for argument's sake, I'm going to spend $5 on this tool over here, and that tool is going to save me $10 a day in workflow. That kind of makes sense. The reason I put it like that is there's a purpose behind it, but there's also a business case. We can justify the expenditure and we know we're going to get some kind of output. So doing that kind of thinking around the AI space, when it comes to software as a service tools, it's probably reasonably easy. And this is also where the Whatfix kind of proposition comes in, because you would say there are probably adoption tools that I'm not using. Is there a different way to surface information? And that takes you down the road thinking about adoption tool, but also thinking about co-piloting. Now, I wouldn't immediately say go to co-piloting unless you have a good handle on your data, because what you just said and what we know around some of these foundational models and the ways that we use things like co-pilots are you're surfacing information based on the data that you have to people who are going to use that information where they need it, which requires you to have the information in the first place. And data management starts to become really important. So is this an L&D question? Possibly not. It's possibly a business management question rather than an L&D question. But if you want to leverage AI tools to be able to surface real-time content, real-time information, real-time data to people when they're working, then where is that data? How is it managed? How is it stored? How is it chunked? Is it somehow structured or unstructured? These kinds of questions need to be on the table first before we then think about using AI to surface all of that information to somebody. But I would say you have these different phases of maturity that L&D folks should be considering. And inherent in that is the idea of working with the business. So usually L&D departments will have some kind of business interface, business partnering, connection with strategy or something. But it also requires you to have collaborations with HR, with IT, with some of these other departments that are also doing things around systems implementation, but are also making inroads into implementing AI. For example, your IT department is going to be implementing your Microsoft environment. If you're thinking of using Copilot, you need to be talking with them to figure out what is and isn't possible within the license structure that you have. You might have an implementation of an open AI implementation or something else. But that's likely to be an IT-driven initiative. Make sure that you're fully aware of those things. Use what you got, figure out what else you need, and make sure you're talking to them.
That's interesting as well. So let's say, just to talk from Whatfix's side, we're a 1,000-employee company, and there's so many possibilities with AI now. In fact, we are already using some 10, 20 AI tools across different departments within Whatfix, right? And in fact, there have been conversations that we should have a framework on how we should actually use AI tools and how do we regulate it within the organization, right? Because see, it's simply put, it's automating a lot of tasks that which took a lot of hours for us, right? So that's the crux of it. Now, while you said the different stakeholders in the organization who actually makes this decisioning, right? I would want to touch upon that. But before that, now let's say, think about an individual contributor and they are curious enough, they want to try out different possibilities and they want to make sure that, okay, this helps them in one way or the other. It goes ground up, right? It's not like, okay, we are using this tool, why don't you try it out? We'll train you on it. If you're thinking the other way around, right? So somebody's curious, they want to solve some problems. Can AI do this? How should you think about it? How should you actually go from the basic, okay, what kind of AI tool should I look into to solve my problems, right? How do you construct the thought process?
So I'm going to take this back a number of years, a number of decades to when we were children. And when we were children, we would wander around the garden. We would, pick up sticks and pick up rocks, and maybe you put things in your mouth, depending on how old you are, right? You had this curiosity to touch and taste and feel the entire environment around you because you were experimenting with the rules in that environment. As adults, we have all of these rules around us, and we're almost scared to have that same curiosity. In an
Right.
organization, you would be saying, well, am I allowed to do this? Because maybe some rules, some IT, some governance, something. Now, generally speaking, I can't speak for every organization. Please, everybody go check the rules in the organization before you do anything I'm about to say. But you have effectively a distinction, and that distinction is your company data should be kept private. That is your commercial confidentiality. Your client data, the same. When you are at work, but you want to experiment with AI models, you can do that in a way that is, or even outside of work, you can experiment in a way that does not yield any data to anybody else. So it's important that you get that distinction. We talked about compliance training earlier, and most of the compliance training is to try and give you these rules to try and make sure that you have safeguards around your company risks. But as a person, as a curious person, you have access to the internet. And on the internet, you can start searching for things. And you can go search for any of the AI tools. Is there an AI tool that allows me to make a PowerPoint slide? Or whatever the question is that you want to ask. And you will get a lot of hits. Now, most of these tools have some kind of free tier, some kind of free version that you can go and use. And you can go and try and make a PowerPoint presentation about your cats or whatever it is that you have in your personal life. Give me 10 recipes for roasting chicken, something that's a personal interest to you, and try and play with the tools and the technologies that we have available to us and figure out if there's any value add. Now, we're talking about L&D, so primarily we're talking about things like content creation or things like integration of systems. Integration of systems is going to be very difficult to do outside your company environment, so make sure you work with your IT teams. But the rest of it, I gave my mother's 75. I put Copilot on her tablet and showed her how to use it. And she was looking at making children's books for the grandchildren. Something that she was interested in, had no company data in it. Let's see what the AI tool can do. Everybody at every age pretty much has this curiosity in us, but we're almost scared to bring that to work. So I would say, find that curiosity and go and use the tools that are available. Find out, this is part of problem solving. Find out the things that will help you with the problem that you have, apply some kind of purpose to that, but do it in a way that is not jeopardizing or adding risk to your work. But play is very important.
Right. In fact, you could use AI tools to find other AI tools as well.
Yeah,
That's another way. I use Perplexity a lot. It's more of a go-to
Yeah.
search engine now, and ChatGPT is also getting more search engines, and that's being launched everywhere. That's very interesting because you're also able to cite what others have actually put in. It's just feeding you information. It's actually collating information from so many different places, and it's all there, right? So you're consolidating it, you're identifying, okay, this is actually something which is useful. This is actually verified or validated, and then using it. Great. So interesting point. And so I'll dial back to the point that we started this with, right? So within the organization, there are so many structures, right? And in fact, while you talk about how the data should be, let's say, you should be making sure that the data is all good while using all these AI tools. There's so many stakeholders that comes in the decision-making process as well, right? Being a CISO or the security officer as well, alongside with so many other potential stakeholders within an organization, if you want to integrate an AI in the first place, right? So is there a specific point of, let's say, organization maturity in L&D, or where we should actually think that, okay, AI solution is become unnecessary, right? And what kind of stakeholders should be part of that decision-making process?
Yeah, the point is there are points at which L&D needs to reach out to others. And the point really is around delegated authority or autonomy. Some L&D departments will have budgets and they'll have autonomy to buy a certain amount of technology. They will likely at that point also be in an organization where the organization itself has some kind of technology strategy or some kind of technology governance in place, which L&D departments will of course need to adhere to. And those will be checking things like information security, things like data privacy, etc. So a number of different governance parameters will be checked in that way. So bringing in a tool into an organization is do it in accordance with your organization's governance, for example. But you mentioned the I word, the integration. So integrating a tool is different to just using a tool on a browser. So you have a lot of browser-based tools which you can use, AI tools. You mentioned Perplexity. That's something I use as well, or it's browser-based, right? You open a browser, you type in some things, and out comes some output, right? And hopefully then you go and check the sources to make sure that everything that was said was actually true. But most of the tools that we're talking about are actually browser-based. So there's not really an integration imperative in L&D content. When we're talking about a more detailed the Microsoft AWS style tools, of course, there is way more that you need to do in terms of systems implementation. But from an L&D point of view, the content side probably doesn't need any integration. The platform side will, but I think most L&D departments of big organizations that are big enough to warrant a platform probably have some kind of platform already. If you don't have a platform, then the chances are you're not big enough that you have all of these robust and restrictive, potentially, IT governance processes in place. So at that point, you would need to figure that out as you go, depending on what your organization does.
Great. So now I want to change the gear a bit. Let's talk about the flip side, right? So I'll come at you with a fully loaded question, right? So do you see a future where AI completely automates the creation and delivery of content? And if so, how do you think it'll impact the entire learning tech space? What should people be preparing for?
I'm going to bounce that back and talk about value instead of technology, because is it foreseeable that you could have a Copilot style tool? I don't mean necessarily Copilot as the Microsoft brand, but Copilot as humans working with AI synergistically to get some kind of real-time information that potentially is multimodal, being it could be audio, it could be video, it could be images, it could be whatever we want it to be. So if we are co-piloting, we have humans working with AI to ask a question and get multimodal information out. Is it realistic that we can expect that at some point in the future? Yeah, that seems perfectly plausible. Given everything we've seen in the last couple of years, why would we not expect that to come? So is that a future that we can expect? Yes. Does that have an impact on recreating content? Probably it does. But this is where the value point, and it links a little bit to the idea of what does L&D actually do. Now, if we think about a spectrum, we think about a line, think about a scale, we have on one end, I'm going to reformat content by adding some images and putting it into a scroll package. Maybe I'll make a video out of it. That, we'll call that e-learning. It might even be some bullet points on a screen in text with a next button, and we'll put that out to the entirety of the organization, and we'll make it mandatory because there's a checkbox that says we can do that, right? This is all the way over here. All the way over here, we have the idea that I'm going to make a AAA, if you're familiar with that term, Marvel Cinematic Universe, GTA 6, that's that big blockbuster experience. I'm going to make that. Those are very different scenarios. And because they're very different scenarios, the question of can we do that with AI is very different. On this end, we can, of course, do that with AI. We can pretty much do that now. Automating the creation and delivery of learning content, we could do pretty much most of this stuff here right now. The future of co-piloting and multimodal surfacing information is coming. Over this side, having this rich 3D world that's inhabited by lots of non-player characters, and we can, as a learner, we can go take quests and we can learn from scenario-based learning, we can solve problems, and we can think about simulation-based learning within a single environment. That is complex to create. So we're probably not going to get that kind of automation anytime soon. So the point of value is, if you're in an L&D department, where are you on this spectrum? Because if most of what you do is here, then most of what you do can be automated, and it can probably be automated.
Right. And that would clearly add up, right? I mean, will it replace your job? That's the question of the hour, right? So can AI replace your job? It all depends upon how you use it, right? So what's your thought on that particularly?
So it depends on how you use it, but also depends on what you do. So if what you do is you take, as I said, you take a PowerPoint, which has got 5 bullet points on a screen, and you add an image to it, and then you put it on an LMS. And if that's your job, then that can be automated. Whereas if your job is to work with a business to figure out competitive advantage, to think about the behaviors and the motivations of your workforce such that they add value to the business, then make your business competitive in the marketplace. And you're looking at interventions that may or may not be digital, may or may not be human focused. And you're looking at interventions that change the dynamic of your workforce skills such that your business is more successful. And you can measure all of that, and you can create that business case that justifies further investment in technology or tools to allow your business to grow further. That is a very difficult proposition. And that is very useful for a business because you're either making income or you're reducing disruption to income or basically the business or revenue rather than income. Can that be immediately automated? Probably not. So is there a risk around replacing that kind of job? Probably not. Now, there have been a handful of papers on things like task analysis. So where you say which tasks is AI very well suited, and therefore can we let AI do those tasks with appropriate human oversight? Because when we think about that, we start to open up a very different world as well. L&D people used to go and do learning needs analysis. Now, can we do task analysis? And can we understand enough the capabilities of AI and the capabilities of humans that have AI skills to be able to go and do these tasks? And therefore, which of these tasks should be automated? Because it's not only about can we automate, it's also about, is there a reason, is there a purpose? Are we doing it responsibly? And all of these kinds of things. But all of these considerations, so low value, good task fit, and then high value, all of these considerations go into this question of will AI replace jobs? And it's a different consideration for each of these buckets. But I would say on the low cognitive value or high automation potential end of L&D, we should actually be pushing for those jobs to be moved.
Right, absolutely. And it gives us leeway for so many more creative things, right? See, the advent of AI is actually helping us, let's say, go back to those, do stuff that you're really good at. I mean, see, how much of our AI is still being built, it's very far off that it can mimic a human brain, right? So there's so many things that is going on there, and there's potentially so many creative things that can come out of it, right? So, and while AI automates the mundane or the repetitive tasks, we are left with possibilities that you can create, do something that is completely original, which can come in, Yeah, and in fact, we actually talk to a lot of our customers with Whatfix as well. What we do is with the whole learning on the work philosophy that you mentioned, right? So on different applications, we make sure people are aware of how to use it. And if they're already good with it, we just automate the entire thing. It makes it much easier to get to the point. So they are left enough time to actually do stuff that they're really good at, which actually needs a lot of thinking capacity and of doing those mundane, repetitive tasks on a regular basis again and again.
Absolutely. And I think this idea of self-actualization, can we be the best that we can be? Can we live and work in some kind of utopia where every human being is fully satisfied and they have reached their potential? And happiness is a part of this, but also income is a part of this. That's a very different consideration and question, because what you asked earlier was, will AI replace our jobs or take our jobs, something like that. No, on this self-actualization, this is a utopia that we should be pushing for. But on the other end, you also have, I occasionally jokingly say we have three kinds of AI, right? Now, type 1 AI is functional AI, machine learning, things that computers can do. The second type of AI is marketing, right? So we have, this is an AI-powered coffee cup. I would like to sell you this coffee cup. It's got AI in it, right? So this is AI used as a marketing term, right? Whether there's AI or not is irrelevant. Then the third type is we need, if we're restructuring, we're going to somehow reduce headcount. What's the thing we can say is the reason for that? And there's a cynical point in that. Workforces across the globe restructure up and down all the time. And sometimes there are reasons that are unknown to the workforce. Right now, it's possible that sometimes those reasons are AI without there actually being AI in them. So we can think about political use of the term AI, the marketing use of the term AI, and we can think about the actual functionality of AI. So the reason I say that is, will there be companies out there that will reduce headcount because of the term AI? That's not the same as saying AI will replace our jobs. That's saying people will restructure their companies and jobs will go. And the reason may not even be AI. So just something to think about.
Yeah, I think that's been happening throughout decades and eons, right? Industrial revolution came in, factory workers, the whole supply chain management, all of those aspects come in, tech comes in, internet comes in. It keeps happening from time to time. And I think AI is the next one that's happening here. So now in that thought itself, now think about the type of people. See, change management is another big piece. And there is tech savvy folks who thrive in the digital learning environment, who are ready to pick up more things, try new things. And then the other folks who are maybe not that tech savvy, and there's a gap which is widening between them, right? There is, let's say, a skill gap that's widening, the potential of, let's say, tapping into new things that's widening. And such folks exist in every organization, right? The perception is different for them. So how do you manage change in such a situation where there's two divides, or maybe even multiple in that sense?
So there's also an attitude gap. It's not only about skills. So I have seen this in the L&D community starting to emerge, but I've seen it in other communities as well. And that is, I'll give an example, and that is that we have some folks like myself who will talk about technology. I understand it, it's fine, we can deploy it. I've been doing this for a while. But you have in the middle, you have people who are enthusiastic and they want to learn. And they want to learn because it may be useful to them. So they want to be aware of the opportunities. And that's great. Those are people who can come along the journey. And when you say tech savvy employees, it doesn't need to be tech savvy. It needs to be people who have the right attitude and they want to learn. Because you can become tech savvy if you put the time and effort in. And on the other end, you have, well, all this newfangled technology isn't for me. It's never going to stick. I remember the good old days when we used to draw on the sand with a stick and everybody would gather around and everybody would applaud after my lecture because I'd drawn some great pictures on the sand. And why do we need technology? Why don't we just focus on the human to human interaction? And so you've also got people with that kind of attitude who don't necessarily embrace technology. And we have to consider all of these people. It's not only about tech savvy and non-tech savvy. So when we think about that continuum, we have a difference in attitude to embrace, to learn, and to consider the possibilities of what's in front of us. And for decades now, literature has talked about technology being a way for human beings to interact with the environment. So it doesn't have to be AI. It can be a stick that I use to poke a tree or whatever it happens to be, whatever we do, right? An extension of my arm, basically. So anything that we use to interact with our environment is technology, and therefore we should be able to embrace it. There's no real difference between AI or something else. But it's the attitude, it's the value set, it's the am I willing to learn things or am I going to go into a cocoon and try and shut the world out? Every organization will have people on this kind of spectrum. So when you talk about change management, it's almost a marketing push. And I don't see that much difference between marketing and L&D generally with trying to do things that produce a change in behavior. Right? So when we think about that continuum, we should be thinking about how do we market? So how do we ensure that everybody understands the value that can be created from the new things that are around us, but also think about how we bring them on a change, how we manage their concerns and all of these other things. So it's partly about literacy and it's partly about change management and it's partly about marketing. There's no easy answer to that because we also need to consider the organization itself. Every organization has culture. Some cultures will be very embracive of changes. Some cultures will be very resistant to change. So that will determine what the change management effort needs to be.
All right. So Ashwin, I'll come to the end of the entire podcast. It's incredible. There's so many things that we've actually spoken about. And I have this one last question, which I really want to bring it down. How much of all these questions do you think is written by ChatGPT?
That's a great question. If I was doing this, let me spin that slightly differently. If I was doing this, I would usually work back and forth with the AI to get the structure, but then I might tweak every question. So I wonder if you've done that, but has ChatGPT written word for word every question that you've said? I think you've tweaked it ever so slightly, but I can't really tell.
The interesting part is I did look through a lot of content that you have created and fed some of it into the AI, and it did give me some really good insights, which I could work on to create this entire conversation. So I wouldn't say it's 100% me, but the thought and the construction, the creative part of it, yes, that's 100% me, right? But yeah,
That's
awesome. Yeah. So Ashwin, this has been a fascinating discussion. And so before we wrap up, do you have any parting thoughts or any final piece of advice for our listeners who are looking to leverage AI into their current strategy?
Yeah, so I think the big bit of advice is that it can be a big and scary world with lots of scary technologies and terms that are thrown around. But if we bring it right back to basics, the basics are always going to be, what's the business problem that I'm trying to solve? Can I articulate and measure that problem? And then how could technology help me with that problem? And it doesn't even need to be AI. It just needs to be something tangible that actually will add value to your business. And then you can go and look for or search for or try and solve that problem. So always think about purpose first. That's the one bit of advice that I would give to everybody.
Awesome. And where can people find you if they have more questions about AI, if they have more questions on the L&D strategies? How do they find you? How do they talk to you?
So you can find me on LinkedIn. I also have my company website, methodology.com. So I think when you release this, maybe put those in the link. But I'm always happy to have a conversation about AI or AI strategy with anybody in the learning sector or and beyond. Why not?
Fantastic. All right. Thank you so much for joining today, Ashwin. This was an incredible one. And I think this will stand the test of time. There's so many things coming in AI, and we had such deep conversations in this session. So to all our listeners, stay tuned for more such incredible episodes where we dive into the latest trends of L&D, HR, technology, and host more amazing thought leaders like Ashwin. You can catch us on all major podcast platforms, including Spotify, Apple Podcast, and even the videos on YouTube and Shorts and LinkedIn and YouTube. We are everywhere pretty much. So don't forget to share, subscribe. I'm your host, Gokul, signing off. See you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
All right.